And welcome to General Ransom's Weekly Wraps. I'm Viv Govender, and as usual, to do is we'll start off with a general market segment and then end with an AI/tech segment. In a general market segment, look at windfall taxes in Europe, the latest in the US political scene, and then finally do a deep dive into the situation in the Middle East, which seems to be spiraling out of control. And in our AI segment, we look at OpenAI and Sam Altman's latest attempts to raise funds, as well as kind of eliminate competition for his company. So starting off with windfall taxes in Europe. Windfall taxes are once-off taxes. Sometimes the definition is about taxing companies that have had windfalls, once-off huge amounts of profits. They are meant to basically also sometimes be put in place to eliminate short-term budget deficits. So for instance, if there's a war or a natural disaster, you put a tax on certain industries out there who have made money and endeavor to basically kind of balance the budget that way. They've become popular in Europe over the last little while. So for instance, the UK has one in place on energy and natural gas companies that's going to run until almost the end of this decade. In fact, they extended it by one more year. I think that goes to like 2029. France has put in place, or is looking to put in place, another windfall tax on companies making more than $1 billion in turnover, euros in turnover, which is obviously the biggest companies in the country. Italy has one that they're looking at. For instance, they had one in banks, now looking at expanding beyond banks, perhaps looking at things like weapons manufacturers and some other financial sector companies as well. Now, windfall taxes are kind of a misnomer because often these companies may not always be making supernormal profits. It just could be these are the guys that have money at the moment that we can tax to get overcome a budget deficit. And that seems to be the case at the moment in much of Europe. The French basically have a budget deficit approaching 6%. According to the rules of the EU or the Eurozone, you have to have a budget deficit of about close to 3%. Obviously, if you're very high in terms of your budget deficit, there's going to be kind of backlash from Brussels, headquarters of the EU, and therefore you're forced to make some adjustments. So, in terms of what they are looking to do is, like I said, windfall tax, very large companies. Italy as well, windfall tax on financial companies, etc., and perhaps even weapon manufacturers. Now, this is the problem with windfall taxes. Now, Adam Smith had a rule for what would make a good tax. It had to be certain, fair, convenient, and efficient. Now, schools windfall taxes violate at least two of these rules. Why? Because they are not certain. They are things that come out of nowhere. And secondly, they're not fair. They're not fairly put through the entire economy. They usually target industries or companies that are felt to be unpopular, that will have the least political backlash, and they do tend to form distortions in markets. So I do think that the windfall tax is probably not good for that point of view. And the second reason I don't think these are reasonable measures or good measures is because the reason you have a windfall tax is to, like I said, maybe plug a small once-off deficit or an issue with the budget. This is not the case. Europe has long-term structural issues that are going to cause them to have budget deficits for a very long time, probably in excess of what they want to have. They have very slow growth that's not being solved by these windfall taxes. They have a demographic issue in which there's too many old people, not enough young people, and it's going to get worse over time. And they have obviously, spiraling spending in terms of the public sector. And I do think that if you had to look at the situation 5, 10, 15 years down the line, barring something like a massive productivity increase due to things like AI, the European situation fiscally will be as bad, if not worse, than it is currently. And windfall taxes as once-off or short-term tax increases on specific companies do not solve this. So yeah, this is not a great move forward for the European Union, I think. Next, looking at the latest in the US political scene, the election is basically about a month away, on the 5th of November, though people have already started voting in some places. For those that don't know, the way the US election works is it comes down to a few battleground states, about 7 states or so, that really matter. Why? Because most states are either heavily Democratic or heavily Republican. California, as well as New York, are going to go Democratic virtually every single time, barring the most extreme kind of election where you have something like a landslide. They're always going to go Democratic. The same way Florida, Texas tend to go Republican. Again, barring the most extreme elections, they are going to go Republican each time. So if you're in a close election, it doesn't really matter what happens in California or Texas or Florida, because you pretty much know who the winner there is going to be. In a close election, you're looking at actually places like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Nevada. Those places are where you actually have a chance of either winning for the Republicans or for the Democrats. And in those electoral states here, right now it's very, very neck and neck. Most of these states are within the error of a margin of error when it comes to polling, and that means that the polls basically say, yeah, it goes maybe one person's ahead by 1%, 1% ahead by 0.5% somewhere, but the margin of error is 3%. That means this poll is not, accurate to within 3%, or cannot be relied very heavily to within 3%. So these places indicate that we are probably going to have a very close election, and that means we're going to have a long, probably period of counting after the election. Those that are called back to 2000 Gore versus Bush, and that took a long time to sort itself out. The problem I have with this particular situation right now is that back then, once Gore lost, when the Supreme Court was heavily Republican, ruled against him, he did not put up a fight. He did not argue that it was an unfair election. In fact, when people in the Democratic side tried to argue that it was an unfair election, he pretty much went out and said, no, it's our president, George W. Bush. I'm totally in favor of him as being the president, and I'm not disputing this result at all. I cannot imagine that happening this time around. If either Kamala Harris or Trump were put in the situation of Al Gore, I don't think either one would be as gracious and magnanimous as to concede the election as Gore was back in the day. And because, like I said, this election looks really, really close, unfortunately, there's a real chance that that's what we're going to deal with right now. A actual, really close election which is going to be in dispute, which is not great for the situation in the US. Another thing that happened this week was we had the vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance, the Republican vice president candidate, and Tim Walz, the Democratic candidate for VP. By most estimates, Vance did very well. He won. Tim Walz came across as unprepared, showed himself to be lying, or at least basically slightly deceptive around things like, for instance, his stay in China during the Tiananmen Square massacre. He hit some good points around things like abortion and things like, for instance, January 6th. But overall, I think the vast majority is more than a 2-1, sometimes a 3-1 in terms of polling was against Walz and for Vance in terms of who won that election. Won that debate, rather. However, I think this is going to make very little impact. But that being said, an election that's this close, very little impact could still be impactful. So it remains to be seen. Now we're going to do a deeper dive into what's happening in the Middle East and what could be the impact on the global economy and your investments as well. So, latest that's happened in the Middle East, Iran attacked Israel, sent over 100-something, almost 200 missiles into Israel, enough to overwhelm that Iron Dome, which is their Israeli anti-missile defense system. Attacked military targets. They didn't kill any civilians, I believe. I don't think, which was an aim of the Iranians. The Israelis have vowed to respond to that, and they're trying to get approval, possibly from the US, to attack Iranian oil sites. Now, here's the thing: Israel is more than a match for Gaza. It's more than a match for Hezbollah. It may not be more than a match for Iran. Vastly larger country, vastly larger, weapon stocks. It's not going to be something that they want to get into a fight with unless they have U.S. support. The U.S. would actively have to take part in a attack on Iran. The Israelis could not do it alone and escape like they did when they attacked Gaza or when they attacked Hezbollah. And there's not enough. The difference is not enough militarily between the two parties that Israel could come away as unscathed as they did by attacking Gaza and attacking Hezbollah. So they would need to have U.S. support. The problem is, excuse me, that the U.S. right now, Biden is reticent about having an Israeli attack on Iran. The reason being is that it would obviously inflame the situation. It would cause more difficulties, not just in Iran, but maybe globally as well. It would affect oil prices. It would cause quite a big situation. Iran is the third biggest producer in OPEC. So the Gulf states produce about a third of oil in the world. Not only is Iran the third biggest producer in OPEC, but it also has the ability to shut off a lot of that one-third of global oil production from the Middle East, because it can easily attack places like Saudi Arabia and close off the Straits of Hormuz, which is just south of Iran, a small piece of water in which a lot of the world's petrochemicals go through, especially to places like Asia. And because it goes to places like Asia, it would actually inflame tensions with China, because China might look at this negatively and might step in to support Iran, which is, like, remember, part of the BRICS alliance down the line. And then we are looking at a situation in which, what is a regional situation with Iran and with Gaza and Hezbollah, which are not really important in the world. And even Israel is not really a big player in the global economy. Suddenly becomes a global crisis. And so I do think that they don't want to do that, the US at the moment. However, Israel, at least the Israeli politicians, really have a different incentive. The main politician is Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the Prime Minister of Israel, and he is facing a lot of issues. He's up for corruption charges. If he was basically not the Prime Minister at the moment, he would probably be on trial for something. However, the longer this particular situation lasts, with his tensions with Iran and etc., the better it is for him, because firstly it keeps him in power. It ramps up support for the most aggressive parts of his country, and therefore he's really incentivized to keep ramping up the tension. People are even saying that there was actually a peace deal with Hezbollah that the Americans had brokered, but Israel then, after the peace deal was brokered, attacked and killed the leader of Hezbollah. So it does indicate that they are basically on the trajectory, or at least have the incentive to try and push things higher and higher. Another reason they might want to push things higher and higher is that if Kamala Harris wins, they are likely to have much less support from the US than if Donald Trump wins. And if they ramp up tensions and embarrass the Democrats at the moment, it might actually help them longer term as well, because then Trump comes into play, and then he's more likely to support Israel against Iran than the Democrats are. Trump, for those that don't recall, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, helped with the Abrahamic Accords, which tried to make a deal between Israel and places like Saudi Arabia, etc., and ignored the situation with the Palestinians. You've seen some of the stuff he's put out there about regime change on Hezbollah's side, etc. So Trump has a lot of right-wing, people in his administration or in his close circle are likely to support Israel above Iran, even more than the normal, Americans do. So yeah, this is going to be, I think, a case where the incentives indicate that Israel is probably going to push things with Iran, trying to make this into a larger war. That larger war is going to not just impact Iran and Israel, but maybe impact oil production out of the whole Middle East, affecting, like I said, maybe as much as 1/3 of the world's oil production, which would, I think, in the overall situation, possibly cause global economic strain, bring places like China into play, maybe even places like India into play as well, because India also gets a lot of its natural gas and oil, etc., from the Middle East, and would be affected by something like this. Would divide the world, I think, in a very chaotic way between the US and its allies, and perhaps China and a grouping including Iran and Russia. So yeah, this is not a great situation, and unfortunately right now it would appear that not only is it likely to escalate, it's likely to escalate in the next month or so ahead of the US election. Next, looking onto our tech segment, OpenAI is raising funds, and some people are saying they're looking to raise as much as $50 to $100 billion to fund the next couple rounds of training. We don't have GPT-5 yet, but if GPT-5 is as good as has been intimated by Sam Altman, I don't think they'll have a problem raising these monies. But the interesting thing about this current fundraising thing is that Sam Altman is not only trying to raise funds, he's trying to block his competitors from making money as well. So he's gone out and basically said that there's about 5 companies or so he does not want these funders to basically fund as well. He doesn't want them to fund XAI from Elon Musk. Ilyas Skaya, his former head scientist, also has a company. He doesn't want that to be funded. He doesn't want to fund to be able to fund a thing called Perplexity, which is a very fancy AI search engine. And also there's a company called Glean as well. And Anthropic also, founded by former members of OpenAI. He doesn't want those guys to be funded as well. And so he's said about 5 or so companies that he says he doesn't want anyone that funds OpenAI to fund those companies as well. Now, the way the AI situation looks at the moment is that we are on a what's called a scaling kind of cycle, which means that the more money you have, the more compute you have, the more you put into getting the next model out. And the more powerful the next model is, depends to a large extent on how much money you spent on it. And so therefore, those are the one with the most money is probably going to have an advantage here. And if you are OpenAI and you can get, like I said, 50 plus 100 billion plus funding in, you'll have a lot of money. And then if you could use that at the same time to basically prevent your competitors from getting money, that makes your advantage even greater than it otherwise would be. And I think this is a very, very strong move by Sam Altman. If it works, he's going to get a monopoly, but I don't think it will work. Why? Firstly, XAI, Elon Musk probably can access $30 to $50 billion more. Just look at his ability to raise money to buy Twitter. XAI is going to be a better deal for most people than Twitter is. So he can easily raise 30 to 50 billion more. And that will probably take him to the next round, maybe even 2 rounds in terms of AI scaling. That's not even looking at his ties with places like the Middle East, etc., where he can probably get funding from, to the Saudis and some other Gulf players. His network of wealthy people that he's close with, also funding. Remember, he has 2 companies that are worth more than a couple $100 billion, SpaceX and Tesla. And he has a couple other companies as well, things like, for instance, Neuralink, that are also worth multiple billions. And so his history of being a good bet in terms of investors is really that Twitter, I think, is the exception to the rule. Anthropic, linkages with Amazon, easily you can see them raising, tens of billions to at least to the next couple of rounds. Some of the small companies like Perplexity, Glean, and Ilyas Sky's company, I don't know if they'll be able to survive this, but some of the bigger guys out there will definitely survive this, and I don't think he can eliminate all his competition, but he probably will be able to get rid of some of the smaller guys there if he can basically prevent them from getting funding. This comes after, remember, he remains as the sole main mover at OpenAI. He pretty much got rid of all his rivals in terms of the board, in terms of other executives and people, senior people at the company. With Mira going, with Ilya going, with the board going, Greg Brockman basically on sabbatical at the moment, and him being given 7% of the company worth about $10 billion at the moment in terms of valuation. All these things together makes you believe that he's really playing hard right now. And people have said in the past that Sam Altman is a really sharp, really hard player. I think there's this quote where somebody's saying that if you put him on an island of cannibals, after 5 years he'd be the king of the cannibals, and that's pretty much what he's showing right now. Remember, these guys don't get to where they get to by being nice and basically kind and like whatever. They are generally very, very tough players, and this is the kind of move a tough player would move. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week. Cheers.